Hey, welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on war and peace in Jewish tradition. I believe this is the third week that we are dealing totally with Mashiach and the Messianic era, all the different traditions, ideas about this, of course, very, very important concept that we're all longing for. So tonight we have a whole number of different insights. They're not in any particular order here. So I'm going to start with a Gemara in the Masechet Shabbat, page 31a. And it says that when a person leaves this world, there's a judgment. We believe very strongly that there's a judge and there is judgment in this world and in the next world. And this Gemara says that when we arrive to the judgment, they initially ask us four questions. And this is the order in the Talmud. Nasata v'natata bi'amuna. Did you do business in an honest way? We might think there would be all kinds of other questions that would come first. Did you believe in God? Were you a good Jew? Did you do the mitzvot? Did you learn Torah? But the first thing is, were you honest in business? The second question is about Torah. Kavata itim l'Torah. Did you establish times to learn Torah? Meaning, what's called like a seder of learning, that a person takes it upon themselves to, like right now, most of the people here come every Tuesday evening. And so that is all of us have established this time, Tuesdays, for learning. So that's what they asked. Did you establish times to learn? The third one is asakta b'pirya urevia. Did you try to do the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply, which is actually the first mitzvah in the Torah. And sometimes it's even called the mitzvah rabbah. The great mitzvah is bringing children into the world. And the last one, this is why I'm bringing this whole Torah, is Sapita liyeshua. Did you anticipate the redemption, the coming of Mashiach, the Messianic era? Did you long for it? Was it important to you? So that's the fourth question that's asked. And I'm bringing this because that's in the context of what we're learning here, is that I believe last week we saw that in the Amidah, in the standing prayer that we say 3 times a day, we see that there's 2 blessings. One is where we express our longing, our desire for the sprout of David to reveal itself. And the first one is in Jerusalem, and that David's kingdom can be renewed. And then right after that is the blessing for anticipating the redemption. And so the question is, though, do we feel it on the inside? Is it important to us? Do we truly long for it, pray for it? So that's how we're going to start this evening, is the idea that we all have our lives, we all have our bills to pay and the rent to pay and food to put on the table and trying to get some enjoyment out of life. Question is, these 4 questions are telling us what should be important to us. So here, among the most important things is this idea of anticipating, longing for, desiring for a redemption for the Jewish people and for the whole world. Okay, so the next idea is it's connected to a verse in the Song of Songs, Shira Shirim. And here it says, for those who would like to know, it's the 2nd parak, the 7th verse, 2:7 in the Song of Songs. It says, Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim. It's from the word shavua, which means to swear. In the Art Scroll, it says, I adjure you. In other words, I am pleading of you, but I'm also kind of putting it upon you. Benot Yerushalayim. Here, the daughters of Jerusalem are being addressed. We're going to see in a minute, it's not clear who is speaking here. It's either Israel speaking or God is speaking. We'll come back to that in a second. But again, I adjure you, I want to make you swear, the daughters of Jerusalem, b'tzvaot o ba'ayilot hasadeh, by the hosts. This could be the host of heaven. It could be the host of God. One of the names of God is connected to this word, tzvaot, Hashem tzvaot. All the ayilot hasadeh, or the gazelles of the field. In ta'iru, ve'im toraru, et hava ad shetechpatz. That you, if you dare to arouse love while it still gratifies. Again, there's many ways that we could translate this. So I'll just go back. Again, we'll say in a second, either God is saying this or Israel is saying this. I make you swear, the daughters of Jerusalem, by the hosts or by the gazelles of the field. If you awaken, if you arouse love until it is desired. I translate a little bit differently this time. Okay, so what do the commentaries say about this? What is going on here? So let's go slowly. Rashi, Sforno, and the Metzudat David, a commentary, it says that this is Israel is speaking to its neighbors. The Benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, are the daughters are like the surrounding nations of Jerusalem. And so poetically, they're called the daughters of Jerusalem. They're not Jerusalem. That's the Jewish people. That's the city of Jerusalem. But the daughters are the surrounding nations. And Israel is addressing them and saying to them that as long as we have a covenant with God, don't you try to arouse love that will supplant us. In other words, even if we're in exile, and even if we're suffering from the consequences of our sins, don't think you can arouse God's love to turn away from us. That's one explanation of this verse. The other one is that it's God is speaking. And God is speaking, and there's two versions of this. God is speaking, the Benot Yerushalayim is the Jewish people, the daughters of Jerusalem. God is addressing them and making them swear not to arouse love until it's the right time. Meaning, and this is the Talmud, Ketubot 111b. What I'm about to say is how the Talmud is interpreting this verse in Song of Songs. And it says, God is saying to the Jewish people, when it says don't arouse love, it means don't try to go back to Eretz Yisrael until the right time, until I determine, this is God speaking, until I determine it's the right time. And so the Gemara says that God made an oath. He made Israel take an oath. And the oath was, when we are in exile, that we would not come up to Israel like a wall. Now, what does that mean, like a wall? So the Talmud in Ketubot says what it means is in mass. So I'm going to go back a little bit. This whole Gemara in Ketubot is a story of Rebbe Zera and his Rebbe Yehuda. They're in Babylonia. And Rebbe Zera desperately wants to go to Israel, move to Israel from Babylonia. And Rebbe Yehuda does not want him to go. And not only that, but he feels it's forbidden until God shows us a sign that it's time to go back. Now, so Rebbe Yehuda held even an individual should not go up to Eretz Yisrael. Most of the other sages did not agree with him and said this idea that the oath that God made us take was only to what's called push the final redemption, to try to force the final redemption by coming back to Israel in mass. But for an individual to come to Israel, there's no problem. Again, this is part of many, many disagreements in the Gemara about many, many different things. But here, the different opinions that are being quoted is because Rebbe Zera wants to go to Israel, and Rebbe Yehuda feels that it's not permissible. And so he's trying to bring opinions that this oath that God made us take means that we have to be in exile until God shows us a sign. Rebbe Zera and many, if not most of the other sages was for an individual to go, and even for many Jews to go, but just not, the Jews should say, Mashiach is here, and we're all going to Israel at once. So there's actually a question asked because part of the whole history around the time of Purim, so Cyrus, Koresh, allowed Jews to go back to Israel and rebuild the second temple. And there it's discussed, well, could they go? Is this like a en masse aliyah to Eretz Yisrael? Is it permissible? And so the idea was yes, because in the prophets, Koresh is given the inspiration from God. The prophet says that God, in a sense, picked out Koresh to be the vessel to allow the Jews to come back. So there, it turns out the opposite. Very few actually answered the call. Very few, something like 42,000 or something, actually came up with Ezra and Nehemiah in order to build the second temple. And many people felt it was a lost opportunity because Cyrus was God's instrument to allow everyone to go back. And very few people heard the call. Okay, so we see two different opinions. It's Israel speaking to the nations saying, in a sense, don't try to supplant us. We still have a covenant with God. And so don't try to arouse God's love for you at our expense. And the other one, as we said, is God making Israel take an oath not to go up to Israel as a wall. And so they speak about that in actuality, there were three different oaths that God administered. One was to Israel, is not to go en masse back to Israel until the time was right. One oath was to the nations, that while Israel is in exile, not to oppress them too much. And the third one was not to try to force the Messianic era. This is all written in the Talmud in Ketubot 111a. Another version of this verse is, it's actually Moshe speaking to Israel. Moshe speaking to Israel after the sin of the spies, when God then commanded that whole generation would not be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. They would have to wander for 40 years. So during that time, Moshe addresses the Benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, and said to them, we have to accept this decree of 40 years in the desert. Don't try to arouse the coming of Mashiach or coming to Eretz Yisrael prematurely. We have this decree and we're going to have to wait it out. So that's a whole other version of who is speaking here and for what purpose. So here we see, like many, many verses in the Torah, that there are many different interpretations. And each and every one of them has some merit, some point of truth. I will mention, and it's something that we mentioned already, and this just almost strengthens it. We talked about at the beginning of the Zionist revolution, the Zionist idea of coming back to Israel. So among the scholars, among the rabbis, so this Gemara that we're talking about became instrumental in what position would the religious world take. Was this going against the oath? Was this what's called going up in mass? Or no, the Aliyah to Israel has been going on for 140 years now. That's not exactly all at once. And so therefore, there's nothing going against this oath that we're learning about here. Others felt differently. Others felt that, with all due respect to Theodor Herzl, he's not exactly the Mashiach, and he's not exactly a Torah personality or a prophet who all of a sudden can declare that it's time for Jews all over the world to come back to Israel. Anyways, I'm not mentioning rights or wrongs here. I'm just mentioning that this idea, based on this verse in the Song of Songs, became a very real point of discussion, of dissension, as to when is the right time to come to Eretz Israel. How should we come? And is this the right time? Is this the right signs? Is God sending us the signs? Who are we to not listen to them? Or maybe these aren't the right signs. So this is just a very, very a deep part of all the decision making that had to be made during the first 40, 50 years of the Zionist movement. Okay. Okay, so now the next source is from the Tikkunei Zohar. The Tikkunei Zohar, there are 70 what are called tikkunim, call them chapters, 70 chapters, and they're called rectifications. And this is in the 21st tikkun of Tikkunei Zohar. So just a very, very interesting idea comes up here. So it says like this. Give me 1 second. So it starts by talking about the Yetzer Hara and the snake of Gan Eden. And so it says like this. It says that when a person confronts the Yetzer Hara, that really the Yetzer Hara wants to, in a sense, kill us, destroy us, make us sin, make us not fulfill our purpose in this world. And so we are, in a sense, in constant war with the Yetzer Hara. This is something we've talked about, and it's such an important idea when we're looking at war and peace in Jewish tradition, to understand that war or struggle or confrontation happens on many, many, many different levels. And so, in a sense, every single person is in a state of constant struggle with their own evil inclination, which really never lets us go. So it says like this, that it was the snake that caused death in the first place to Adam and Chava. And so it gives this idea that whoever can slay the snake will merit to the daughter of the king. The daughter of the king is Malchut. That's what the daughter is. Of the Sfirot, the daughter is Malchut. And this is definitely one of the sources of the very, very famous story from Rabbi Nachman called The Lost Princess. It's not exactly the saying that whoever merits to kill the snake will merit to the princess, to the daughter of the king, to Malchut. But one of the most famous stories of Rabbi Nachman is called The Lost Princess. And it begins, there was a king who had 6 sons and 1 daughter. So the 6 sons are what's called Zer Anpin, the Sfirot of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And the daughter is Malchut. And it says that the king loved the daughter very, very much. But one time he got very angry at her. And, after sleeping on it, he felt very bad. But the next day, she had disappeared. And he was really, really besides himself. And his most trusted advisor saw how upset the king was. And he took it upon himself to find the princess and return her to the rightful palace, to the king. And the story goes on, all of these attempts by this advisor to bring the princess back to her rightful place. And my feeling is that this idea here was part of the inspiration for Rabbi Nachman. So the Tikkunei Zohar continues and says that that many people have tried to slay the snake, and the snake's still around. What can we do? And then the Tikkunei Zohar says, but there was someone who symbolically was able to kill the snake. And who is that? That was Moshe Rabbeinu. And where do we see this? It says in the incident where he saw an Egyptian beating a Jew, and it looked like he was going to beat him to death. And Moshe intervened, and it says that he turned this way and looked, and he turned that way, and he saw that there was no man, and he rose up and he killed the Mitzri. And so the Tikkunei Zohar says this is symbolic of what the Mashiach will do. As we've discussed many times, Moshe is the Mashiach. Hu HaGoel HaRishon, Hu HaGoel HaAcharon. He's the first Redeemer, and he's the last Redeemer. And so this incident in the Torah, which seems to be a localized event, the Tikkunei Zohar is saying that this act by Moshe is symbolic of what Mashiach will do. Mashiach, who has the same gematria as Nachash. The snake and Mashiach in Hebrew, Nachash and Mashiach are the same gematria. So Moshe killing the Mitzri symbolizes how in the future Mashiach will kill the snake. And through that will merit the daughter of the king, meaning he will bring Malchut, the kingdom of David, God's kingdom, onto earth. And then it goes on and says, before I say that, a very deep insight is when it says he killed Ha-Mitzri, the Egyptian. Ha-Mitzri is the same gematria as Moshe. And so many people interpret this is that at that act, Moshe was, in a sense, had to decide. It was like an identity crisis. Is he an Egyptian? Is he the prince? Is he the future ruler of Egypt? Is he an Egyptian or is he a Jew? And so because Moshe and Hamitzri equals the same gematria, so some interpret it that at that moment he made his decision, and not only on the outside but on the inside, he killed the Mitzri and allowed his Jewish identity to come to the fore, to be his new identity. And so it says like this, that at the time of the Geula, this is from the Tikkunei Zohar, Moshe will be the Mashiach. And he will complete this idea of killing the snake. And then it says, what other word has the gematria of Moshe? And that is the next insight, is a perfect lead-in to the next insight, is the other word that has the same gematria as Moshe is Shiloh. Who is Shiloh? So if we remember, before Yaakov dies, he calls all of his sons together and says, I'm going to reveal to you what will happen in the end of days. And we're told that at that moment, the Shekhinah left him. And he was not able to reveal what would happen in the end of days. And then he proceeded to give his sons blessings. But even Rashi, even the literal understanding of these blessings contained a lot of prophecy of who these tribes would be in the future. And so in the blessing to Yehuda, and I'm going to read the whole thing in English. It's one of the longer blessings that Yaakov gave to his sons. It says like this, Yehuda, your brother shall acknowledge, your hand will beat your enemy's neck. Your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. A lion cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you elevated yourself. He crouches, lies down like a lion, and like an awesome lion, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh arrives. And his will be an assemblage of nations. He will tie his donkey to the vine branch his donkey's foal. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes, red-eyed from wine and white-toothed from milk. Very, obviously, very symbolic language. We're going to go back now and try to understand this. So this is coming out of this teaching from the Tikkunei Zohar that is connecting Moshe to Mashiach, and both of them to Shiloh. Shiloh has the same gematria as Moshe. But in the blessing, it says, Ad Yavo Shiloh. Yavo Shiloh, meaning until Shiloh comes equals 358 equals Mashiach. So Shiloh, just the name itself, equals Moshe. Shiloh comes equals Mashiach. So here, Yaakov is prophesying towards the future. So let's understand some of the symbology here, because it's very important to understand about Mashiach. This blessing here is one of the strongest texts about Mashiach in the Chumash. The other one is from Bilam. Strangely enough, Bilam also had a clear vision of Mashiach and the Messianic era and what the Mashiach would do. And if you remember, the Rambam actually quotes the prophecy of Bilam. But here, this is coming from Yaakov. So first of all, the idea that your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. This means that they will accept that the kings come from Yehuda. Who comes from Yehuda? David. David comes from Yehuda, and who comes from David? Mashiach. So here already, it's Yaakov is establishing that the kings will come from Yehuda until the Melech HaMashiach, the Messianic king. Here he calls him a lion. The lion is the king of the jungle. And so the imagery here is that Yehuda will be king not only in Israel, but ultimately the entire world. And then it says, the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda. Again, that the kingship will not depart from Yehuda. But then it says, nor a scholar among his descendants. If you remember in the Rambam, when he's describing who the Mashiach has to be, so he says clearly, he has to be from the house of David, and he has to be a scholar who knows and observes the written and oral Torah, and will be the one to not only teach, but we'll say the word convince, influence the Jewish people and the whole world to accept the Torah. And so here again, this is all prophetic. It says, a scholar will not depart from Yehuda until Shiloh arrives, and his will be an assemblage of nations. And this is the prophecy that Mashiach is coming not just from Am Yisrael, that he will gather all the peoples of the world, and everyone will come together in one acknowledgement of God as the one God and King of the universe. And then it says he will tie his donkey to the vine. So later, the prophet Zechariah says that Mashiach will come riding on a donkey. And it's very much based on what Yaakov is saying. We've already discussed that another prophet says Mashiach will come in the clouds of the sky, meaning miraculously. So we learned that if we merit and we can bring Mashiach sooner, then it could be in a more miraculous manner. But if not, he'll come riding on a donkey in a natural way. But here it says he ties his donkey to the vine. And then it goes on, to the vine branch his donkey's fowl. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes. So what is the symbolism here? The symbolism here is wine in Gematria equals 70. And we know that there are 70 faces to the Torah. And also that the word for the secret mystic tradition is sod, the secret inner dimensions of the Torah. So here, when it says that he ties his donkey to the vine, means that he will be able to take the physical, because riding on a donkey represents physicality. How do we know that? Because the word for donkey is chamor. And chamor is the word for materialism, for physicality. And here I'll bring in a tremendous Rashi when it says that after the burning bush, so God said to Moshe, go back to Egypt. And it says that Moshe put his wife on the donkey. And so you would ask, well, why do we need to know this? So Rashi says this was not just any donkey. This is the same donkey that Avram saddled when he took Yitzchak for the Akedah. And it is the same donkey that Mashiach will come riding on. This is a Rashi. So what does that mean? What it means, the donkey represents physicality. So Avram begins the process of saddling physicality and making it a vehicle for spirituality. Moshe comes and puts his wife on the donkey. This represents a further stage of development of unifying physical and spiritual. But then it says Mashiach will come riding on the donkey, meaning he will become the master, the teacher, the vehicle to teach the whole world how to take physicality and make it a perfect vessel for spirituality. And this represents the whole Messianic era. The idea of physical material world will open up and will be able to perceive and take advantage of the spirituality brimming in physicality. And that in Yaakov's blessing is representative of tying his donkey to the grapevine and laundering his garments in wine. In other words, the inner dimensions of the Torah will soak the world. Our garments will be soaked in the deeper inner dimensions of the Torah, the yayin of the Torah, the sod of the Torah, the 70 faces of the Torah. And then it says, and his teeth will be white from milk. So if you remember that on Shavuos, there is a minhag to eat dairy food, milk food. And there are many, many reasons given. First of all, chalav, milk, equals 40 and represents the 40 days that Moshe was on Har Sinai receiving the Torah. But chalav is white and it represents purity and spirituality and holiness and godliness. And so once the inner dimensions of the Torah are revealed and we have a whole new consciousness, then the symbolically whiteness, holiness, spirituality, purity will encompass the whole world. So these are some very, very important sources about Mashiach. Okay, just 1 second. Oh, let me see if I can find this again. So in the same Tikkunei Zohar that I just quoted, so it mentions, let me see if I can find it quickly. No. Yeah. 1 second. It mentions the idea of being able, in order to defeat the Nachash, the way to do it is by being able to extract sparks of holiness, sparks of light from, call it gross reality, from the, what are called the klipot, the outside shells of reality. So this takes us back to the whole idea of Shvirat HaKelim, where when the initial vessels of creation in the previous world could not handle the light, so they shattered. And with it, though, the light fell with it. And so that's what it says here. It says, Al Yedea Tefillah, Shatem Motziim Al Yedei Zeh HaNitzotzin Kedushin Mehaklipot. So it says that through prayer, a person is able to uplift holy sparks from the shells of reality. And through that, the Nachash can be defeated. So among many different Kabbalistic commentaries, there is this idea very strongly associated with Mashiach that the soul of Mashiach will have to be able to go down into the deepest klipot in order to extract the sparks of holiness in order to help redeem the world. So what I'm going to say now, many of you have heard, but this will give us an idea, is when we look in the Chumash and the Tanakh, and we look for the antecedents of Mashiach, the lineage of Mashiach, what we're confronted with is a very, very strange, paradoxical, bordering on what we might call weird lineage of Mashiach. Very quickly, we're told that the spark of Mashiach comes from the incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. And we're told that the daughter had good intentions. She thought all of humanity had been destroyed from what they saw in Sodom. For all they knew, the entire world had just been destroyed. And she reasoned that if we don't have children, the world is done. And so she sleeps with her father. And from that comes the nation of Moab. And from Moab comes Ruth. And from Ruth comes David. Then we have the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda, we just learned about Yehuda. He is the first in the line that will lead to Mashiach. And the whole story of his sleeping with his daughter-in-law, Tamar, not knowing that. She had a prophecy that kings would come from Yehuda being with her. But Yehuda thought he was sleeping with a prostitute. And what comes from that is Peretz. From Peretz comes the lineage of King David on the father's side. So here, from the mother's side and the father's side, and then we have also the story of Ruth and Boaz, where Ruth goes to the threshing floor in the middle of the night, pretty unheard of in those days, and sits by his feet. And she, in a sense, proposes to him. She proposes to him. He agrees. They get married. And according to tradition, they're together one night and he dies. And from her comes Yishai and David. So we see everyone asks, like, why is this? And then the last one is David himself. Again, I'm sorry, I just don't have time to tell all of these stories in their completeness. But David also is born in a strange kind of a way, where his father thought that he had separated from his wife. And it turns out that his wife, like Tamar, dresses up, conceals herself, and she has relations with her husband. It's still her husband. And David is born. But at that point, there's so much confusion about his birth. He becomes the black sheep of the family. And in fact, when Shmuel comes at God's command, to anoint one of the sons of Yishai. So Yishai had 8 sons. And so Shmuel came and he went through each one of the sons. Each one of the sons seemed, this is kingly material. And God said, no. And so finally Shmuel says to Yishai, is this all of your sons? He said, well, there's one more, but he's out in the field. Shmuel says, bring him. And he looked at him and he said, that's it. That's him. That's him. So here we see this incredibly convoluted lineage of Mashiach. And it's explained, we've discussed this many times, this concept of a measure for a measure, and the idea, Zeh lu'umat zeh asa Elokim. This against this God has made. And so we have this idea, and it's a very real thing in our lives also, that there's this balance between good and evil in the world, between the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. And so when things get too good, you have to be careful. We're warned by the sages, like, don't let pride go to your head. Don't let ego go to your head. If everything's going good for you, don't like go out of your vessels about it, because there's always an opposing force. So here, the idea, and we're talking symbolically, but it's actually quite real in energy. For the soul of Mashiach to come in the world, well, do you think the side of evil would just like, oh, sure, we'll just have Mashiach come in the world and he'll kill the snake and redemption will come? So it's explained that the soul of Mashiach had to come what's called through the back door. it had to come in a way that it wouldn't awaken, at least immediately, the opposing forces. And this is a very, very symbolic or spiritual way to explain it. But it goes along with this idea that Mashiach, because he comes from, in a certain way, the outer shells, from the klipot, from such a strange fallen sparks. And yet that is what will give him the strength to kill the snake, because he'll understand the snake from the inside. So all of this sounds like somewhat too symbolic, but the way we can relate to it very, very much is through the whole concept of a Baal Tshuva. Many people who are watching are Baal Tshuvas. I myself am a Baal Tshuva. And the idea is, so sometimes we ask ourselves, like, why couldn't I have just been born into a religious home and be taught Torah from the beginning? Like, why did I have to go through 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in a whole different lifestyle until I was exposed to Torah? And so one of the ways to understand it, especially for people who became Baal Tshuva, and then whether it became in a professional situation or just part of our life, where by having gone through everything we've gone through, so we can understand people who are not religious or yet religious or turned off to religion or whatever, because of the experiences that we've gone through. And therefore they become, in a great measure, a help, a positive aspect in our ability to relate Torah to people in a way that they can understand. I know for myself, this is a huge part of my life, is having gone through many, 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 many things that in retrospect, I would have wished or chosen I hadn't gone through, but I did. And therefore, I have the opportunity, and any Baal Tshuva has the opportunity to take that and make it in a way that it can be a help to other people. And this is a very deep understanding of the soul of the Mashiach. The soul of the Mashiach is, in a certain way, had to go through fire and water in order to be the Mashiach. And we could just look at the life of Moshe. You could say Moshe is the Redeemer, but the first 40 years of his life, he was Prince of Egypt. And then for 40 years, he was a stranger in a strange land in Midian. It wasn't until he was 80 years old that, in a certain way, all of that could make sense. I mean, you can imagine during those 40 years in Midian, Moshe asking many times, like, what am I doing? Like, why have I gone through what I've gone through? What is ahead of me? What am I supposed to be doing? And so Moshe is Mashiach. So here, this is a perfect example of Moshe is raised in the house of Pharaoh. The same Pharaoh who was bathing himself in the blood of Jewish babies, who decreed that all the Jewish babies should be thrown in the Nile, who was enslaving the Jewish people. That's whose house he's raised in. So now we can understand this whole idea of Lot and his daughters, Yehuda and Tamar, Boaz and Ruth, David being the outcast that he was. And when you read the Psalms, this stayed with David. It made a deep impression of who he was and what he was struggling with. David struggled. If we think Mashiach will just, come as a knight in shining armor and never had any struggles, that's not who Mashiach is. If you look at Moshe, you look at David, these are the two main components of Mashiach. They both struggled tremendously. So I'm going to end with a blessing here, that whatever we've gone through, let's make this personal. We've all gone through fire and water in our own way, everyone, in different ways. But we should realize that if that's what we went through and we just didn't understand, we didn't know better, we had no idea what was flying, that we have the opportunity to turn that into gold, to turn that into something very, very positive for ourselves and for the whole world. That we have that kind of consciousness that can to extract the sparks from the shells, and with that, just like Moshe killed the Mitzri, he was able to, in a sense, kill this alter ego of his that was holding him back. And we also should be able to free ourselves and to be able to kill our personal snake and marry the daughter of the king, to merit to Malchut.